So welcome to collaborative software design, or how to facilitate domain modeling decisions. As Theo said, my name is Gien Verschatse. I work at Artling. I'm a consultant there. I'm specialized in domain modeling and architecture. I've been doing that for 2 years, and before that I was a programmer for about 13 years. And this talk sort of came out of experiences of my entire career and personal frustrations about how decisions are not made sufficiently. And I started digging in, and it sort of ended up in a talk and a workshop and a book, which is fantastic. I just want to talk a bit about how you can make better soft design decisions with that. And I want to start out with a fictitious company called Big Screen. And as with most companies these days, they heavily depend on software. So they don't they don't sell software. They're a cinema chain, but to get everything running, they actually need a lot of software. And that software, you can schedule your movies, customers can book their seats. That's how it works these days. The company is very much fictitious. It's not like I adapted the name of a Belgian company we worked for. That's not it. But I want to describe a problem they had that I have seen in companies I worked for before. So they wanted to start leveraging all that data, all that, turn it into information and see how they could use it to actually, get better at scheduling movies and how long, targeting the right audience, getting more customers to the cinema. They had new competition with Netflix and all that. And they, had all that data anyways, so they wanted to use it. But there was just one tiny problem. Sorry, I was having some issues with moving to the next slide. And it's that, they've been around for a very long time. And, even before you could do all of that stuff online, like booking your seats. And they slowly started building. And over the years, 12 years later, their software system sort of turned into this big ball of mud. I think we've all, maybe not all of us have seen that situation, but it is something that happens quite often. And that was causing problems, of course, because, the business wanted features, they wanted to do new things, right? They wanted to check out, but then the software teams had to say, sorry, we can't do that, or it will take 6 months to do this, or it would take 1 year to do this. So the business was, very frustrated with the development teams, that they just kept hearing no, or it will take a very long time. But they were not the only ones frustrated, because the software teams were also very frustrated, because software developers, they want to do a good job. Everyone wants to do a good job. And it just does not feel nice if you have to keep saying, yes, no, sorry, we can't do that, or we'll only do that in 6 months or a year. It didn't feel very productive that way. So it was causing frustrations all around. And they decided to redesign the system. That's what happens when everyone gets frustrated inside a company. They say, we have to sort of clean this mess up. We are going to redesign the system. So here is an example of what they hoped to decide, right? A clean architecture with very good boundaries and very good, communication between the boundaries. So they wanted to get the bounded contexts in place and have the microservices and see how everything was connected. They didn't want to sort of put all the complexity in the communication between the systems in. So they really wanted to analyze that. And they started to look around, and they find collaborative modeling and domain-driven design. And one of the other goals that sort of came from higher management is that, make sure that this doesn't happen again. So they did get some leeway into introducing new things into the company. I'm having technical issues. Okay. There seems to be something weird going on where my PowerPoint is not going forward. Okay, yes. So I'll just use my mouse from now on. Virtual meetups, always fun. It's not virtual if you don't have technical difficulties. That's what I always say. Yeah, so collaborative modeling to the rescue. They're going to really, dig deep in what the business actually wanted. They wanted to understand that very well, and they weren't going to use collaborative modeling to do that. So what actually is collaborative modeling? Because in the domain-driven design community, we talk a lot about collaborative modeling, but it's actually something that has been around for quite a while. It actually originated in the water resource management field, where they have to make decisions on how to distribute, the amount of water that every sector can actually use when there is a water scarcity. And so the definition is that it is a visualization technique to analyze complex and conflict-laden decision-making processes with all relevant stakeholders and decision makers to create a shared understanding. It's a very long definition. What it basically means is that you want to work with other people to make sure that you understand their problems and you involve everyone that needs to be involved. So how does this actually apply to software? Well, we use collaborative modeling to understand the problem, and we also use it to design the solutions for the problems that we modeled. And for those of you who don't really know what domain-driven design is, I just want to give you my definition, or if you're sort of trying to see how am I, trying to explain domain-driven design to other people, because sometimes that's not easy to do as well. So domain-driven design is a design discipline where you have a few principles, like I want to grasp the domain, we want to agree on a language, which we refer to as the ubiquitous language, we want to express that in shared models, and we want to embrace the complexity of the domain and not simplify it in software, and we want to separate those models in specific contexts, and we actually want to evolve those contexts continuously as our understanding of the problem grows or as the business changes. So that are the principles behind it. And then we have many, many, many tools that actually help us achieve all those principles. We have event storming, we have domain storytelling, we have example mapping, we have a user story mapping. So many, many tools. Some are from the DDD community, some are from the software industry, and some are from other fields that we thought were helpful and we're now using to get a better understanding of the domain and the problems. And so when you sort of go digging into what is domain-driven design, there's this process that people try to do, and we try to sort of express it here. And that is sort of what they thought was going to happen, this process. So they said, we will just align a bit with higher management. We'll use the business model canvas for that. We'll try to understand the business model, what's important, what is not important, what are some of the key things here that we need, like what's the most important activities that we do with the resources. And once we understand that, we'll do some event storming with, with the business, so that we actually understand what the business needs are and what they're expecting of us and how everything should work. And to really understand it, we'll do some example mapping, and we'll dig some into those very difficult parts of the software that we just don't get anymore, like how to reserve seats. We'll really dig into that, and once we understand everything, we'll actually start to decompose into boundaries and see what works best. And as I said, we don't want to put all the complexity in the communication between them, so we'll also see how everything is actually connected, and voila, we will end up with a very well designed software system that will pass the test of time. That is what will happen. What could possibly go wrong here? Well, the answer is people. People went wrong. People have different experiences. They have different opinions. They have a different cultural background, different education, and you just throw that all into the same room when you start collaborative modeling, and you sort of hope it works out. And it doesn't. It causes problems. Yeah? And we talk a lot about socio-technical systems in the past 5 years. I think it's about 5 years ago it really started trending, that term, socio-technical system. But the problem is that we still very much ignore the social aspect of a socio-technical system. What we talk about when we talk about socio is how do we actually, design our teams around those microservices that we now have, and how can we give them autonomy as best as possible. But that is not the hard part about the social and socio-technical systems. It is the people and the conflicts and putting them in the same room and trying to navigate all those different opinions and somehow still come to a good conclusion with nobody quitting at the end of it. Yeah? And so collaborative modeling is very much a socio-technical happening, right? We put everyone in that same room. And there are a few social challenges during collaborative modeling, which I'm going to talk about today, because I think they're very important and they're sort of ignored right now when we're doing collaborative modeling. And that's ranking, conflict, resistance, and polarities. We also have cognitive biases, but that's kind of a talk all on itself. So I won't be touching on that right now. But I'll happily post on the meetup notes some recommendations on where you can start figuring this out. Yeah? So the first thing I want to talk about is ranking. Yeah? When we're in a group, yeah, we like to think about the social hierarchy that we are in. Yeah? We like to figure out how much power someone has inside that setting, right? We're in a meeting room, everyone is sitting at the table or staring at the wall when you do collaborative modeling. And we sort of try to understand or place in that situation, which is a very human thing to do. Yeah? And we rely on two things to do that, which is explicit ranking and implicit ranking. Yeah? And so explicit ranking it's very clear, it's very obvious. Yeah? If you go to most company websites, you actually see who the CTO is, you see who higher management is, you see the team leads, and you see the developers. We all get the job title, and we sort of understand where that puts us in the hierarchy. Yeah? And depending on where exactly in that hierarchy are, people give you or take certain power. Yeah? And we sort of figure that out. Yeah? So if we're in the same room with the CTO, we kind of understand, well, has a lot more power than I have. But we also do this less purposefully, less explicit, implicit ranking. And that means that there is a group of attributes that very unconsciously, most of the time even, coming from our own values, our own experiences, which we find important or less important. And when we're in a group, we sort of try to figure out how everything works with regards to those characteristics. An example is your education. Does this person has a PhD? Do they have a master? Do they not have a formal education? Were they self-taught? And we give a certain score to that unconsciously in our head, and then we see where exactly is everyone. Another one that I find in modern times very important is language. If someone is native English, they still have a leg up to someone who had to learn English and it's not their native language, because no matter how good you get at speaking a language, I'm very fluent in English, I will never be a native English speaking person. There are things that I miss, put me in a kitchen and I basically can't speak English anymore. And I can do it well in this context because I have been doing it for 15 years. But learning English also is not easy for everyone because they have a different background in languages. Dutch is very close to English. So for me, that was easier even to do. And if you can't express yourself well, you actually, definitely accents, if you think about Italian and French accents, we give a certain ranking to that. And then the last one, which sort of Mindel, who talks about implicit ranking, calls magical power, which I prefer to use the term unique abilities, right? Like we have the rock star developer, we have the ninja UX designer, all that kind of stuff. And we consider them almost magical at that point. And we also, give them, if someone has a lot of domain knowledge because they have been working in this company a lot of time during collaborative modeling, they will take up a lot more space and a lot more time, even if there is someone who is more knowledgeable in a very specific area, because, everyone is like, well, they do know a lot. And one of the things that we try to do in collaborative modeling is we try to make this explicit. So as you can see here, there's a way to computate your exact rank, and we sort of put it on a scale from how higher to lower, because we make the implicit explicit, and socially we also want to start doing that, make this implicit ranking more explicit. And why is that important? Is because, that person that takes up so much space in one of the collaborative modeling meetings often just isn't aware that he or she is sort of limiting other people to speak because he has this high implicit rank. So that's what we do. That it is one of the social aspects that we try to address during collaborative modeling. When we notice that it starts causing problems, we will actually do this very simple exercise and try to deal with it. Another thing is conflict. And if you're like me, then you're very conflict averse. For the longest time in my life, I actually just walked out of the room when there was conflict. I cannot deal with it. But I slowly had to start adjusting my understanding of what conflict actually is, because walking out of a collaborative modeling session is not really doable. Well, it is doable, it just does not leave a good impression when you walk out of a room. And the reason is that because, most of the things that I have experienced in my life and I consider conflict is, the slamming of doors and the yelling at each other and the not listening anymore, and the really bad stuff. But I came to realize that what I saw as conflict is actually very much at the end of a conflict. A conflict starts with two differences in opinion. That's it. That's what a conflict is. And most of the time when we have a conflict, it doesn't even really register that we're in it. And because we don't register that we're in it, it starts escalating. People have certain emotions, they don't know how to express it, and it just starts rolling there. And then we end up with that, the slamming of doors or the yelling with each other. So as we're doing collaborative modeling, it's very important to keep the conflict in the begin phases, in the difference of opinion between two people. We have to do that. That's one of the social challenges that you have during collaborative modeling. And resistance is a special form of conflict. It happens when people don't feel heard. So you can have conflict when you have, difference of opinion and you don't really think about it. But resistance is very specific to not feeling heard. It's not that other people sort of consciously are not listening to you, but it's that you don't feel heard. Yeah? And I want to sort of give you an understanding of what, how resistance can actually activate by giving you an example from my personal life. And I don't come off very well in this story because I am one of those humans in the room. But I'm gonna, tell you anyway, and hope you don't judge me too harshly afterwards. But a few teams ago, we had a team lead that sort of wanted to clean up the code, which was very great. And we had this formatter who was going to do that for us so that everyone sort of had the same code layout when we were programming. And they told us to this, and they said, if you have any questions or any ideas on how to use this tool, please let me know. And I prepared everything. I gave a few examples. I looked at how the other team members sort of formatted, and I tried to find some good compromises so that everyone sort of had something. And I presented them to the team lead, and it just got wiped off the table. Yeah? So everything I tried to say as to why it was good or why this option was good, it just got wiped off. Yeah? And then came time to start using this formatter. And I didn't. This is the part where I look very bad. It's not like I consciously said, I am going to resist this decision because this person did not listen to me. That is not what happened at all. It's just that I started sort of joking, and I'm very good at sarcasm. You can ask Theo, my colleague. I'm wonderful at sarcasm and sort of try to make a few jokes. We were forced to use this formatter under the default settings, and whenever the subject came up or there was a question, I sort of, as long as it's under the default settings, which is not a very nice thing to do. Yeah? And I tried to install it and it didn't work, and I didn't put much effort into making it work, and I got more and more frustrated. And anyways, I quit my job. And I know what you're thinking. It's like, Gien, you quit your job for a formatter. How ridiculous can you be? Like, it's not bad enough you behaved that childish on the work floor, but then you actually quit your job. And the truth is, no. It was sort of the last, I don't know if this is in English speaking, but it was sort of the last drop that made the bucket flow. Is that an English one as well? We say this in Dutch, right? Because during that meeting, which triggered my behavior, which is resistance, sarcastic jokes, being disruptive, go slow, meaning not wanting to fix the issue and not using it, and eventually quitting my job. And I did that because I felt unheard again. I felt dismissed again, right? So this wasn't the first time that it happens. And if this happens for the first time, if you feel unheard, you can sort of deal with it. But if this, special type of conflict sort of keeps happening, then at some point you start to resist. And that's not, you can do that in group, right? It's why we have strikes. At least, in Belgium, we have strikes. So it's in group setting or you individually, you really start resisting anything that happens towards that person or towards that group of people. And the thing is that often you can sort of find the reason of that, the inside the company. It's a pattern, it's a repetitive behavior. You will find that I was not the only one resisting. And at all levels, if you have the explicit ranking, if you look at all those levels, there was resistance. And it's because there was this culture inside the company of not really listening to people with a lower rank. And we call that a fractal pattern. And it's what it just means is that, a pattern is if you have behavior and you do it repetitively. A fractal pattern is if you find that specific behavior throughout the company. Then it becomes company culture, and it's repetitive. It's not just negative. I gave you an example of a negative pattern. We have a lot of positive patterns in companies as well. Like team building, sometimes doing small team building exercises throughout the company. And, I have seen that happen, and it's very great. So this does not have to be something negative, but it is something to look out for, because they can be very disruptive if you keep them unmonitored, and you kind of have to address them, and they will show up during collaborative modeling for sure, these patterns. And then another social challenge that you have is a polarity, and a polarity is basically a problem you can't solve, but you need to manage it. For example, you have, in the software, you have the whole versus the parts. I talked about we sort of want the Goldilocks communication. We don't want our microservices to be too small, and we don't want them to be too big, and we don't want the communication between services be too complex or too so Goldilocks. So we look at the whole and the parts of that. We look at the microservices specifically, and we look at the bigger picture to understand how that communication, and we have to balance it all the time. There's no perfect solution to how to design your system. And so we just have to always keep those two in mind when we are designing and when we are making design decisions, to make sure that we keep that balance. And so that's a polarity inside your software system. But polarities also happen with people. You have, for example, a question we get a lot is, when do we start coding? Or can we start coding now? Or what the hell are we doing in this room? As long as it's not in production, we don't know if it's going to work anyway. And so a polarity you'll find when you start doing collaborative modeling is collaborative modeling versus coding. And it's something you'll have to manage. You'll have to do enough upfront design, but you also have to test it out in code, because converting it to code or starting to refactor towards your solution will give you insights that you will just not have. And we need to do both. And often we sort of get this conflict between an architect and a CTO, both in leadership roles. Both have sort of different priorities, and one advocates heavily for, we need to start doing this collaborative modeling, we need to do more design. And then for CTO says, well, that's very expensive. And they're not incorrect. Putting all those people in a room is very expensive. We need to start coding now. And then often what happens is the person with the highest rank sort of gets to decide when this polarity sort of shifts or when it doesn't, and they get their preference. And we have to be careful about that, if most people prefer to continue collaborative modeling, or most people in that room want to start coding, and even though the person in the leadership role wants to do something else, we have to make it obvious that, well, there's a lot of people who don't feel ready yet to move on, but they're sort of agreeing with you because you're the CTO here. And they're not comfortable going against that. Or they're agreeing with you, because you designed a previous system, and they don't feel comfortable going against your implicit rank, things like that. So we have to take that into account. And so redesigning a system is very much also a socio-technical happening. Collaborative modeling is a socio-technical happening, but the whole redesign is also a socio-technical happening. And the reason for that is because your technical choices have social consequences, have a social impact, and vice versa. Let me get some water first. And we, as I said, the social gets ignored. So we don't always think about the social consequences when we're redesigning a system, and you have to. For example, if you choose a certain technology, you will actually create a skill gap. Okay? And then we're back to those unique skills of implicit ranking. Okay? And the people who know this technology very well will actually get a higher ranking implicitly. Okay? And so they get more time to talk and share their ideas, in contradiction to all the others that don't know how to do that. And so we have to make sure that there is some way to educate people in this skill gap that we create. I want to give you an example about test-driven development from my own experience, to make it a bit clearer how your technical choices impact the social, have social consequences. So I worked on a team that did test-driven development, because I don't like getting up at night. I just don't. And we had very well tested. Whenever we pushed to production, things were very well. We had bugs. All software has bugs. But compared to one of the other teams, we were doing really great, and it was because of test-driven development. The other team will basically, their house was on fire every evening. Whenever they pushed to production, things didn't do. They basically started having an open line to the hotfix pipeline because they had to push so many fixes to it. And higher management saw this, and they looked at that team and they were like, oh my God, look at their dedication working at night. And they got promotions, and they got pay raises that my team didn't get, because we worked from 8 to 5. We made sure we only had to work from 8 to 5. Okay? So higher management gave them a higher ranking, an implicit higher ranking, because they saw the consequences of not using a technology, and they were like, wow, this is really great, look how dedicated they are. And I was very frustrated, because we were actually doing a better job. It's just that nobody saw it that way. And I have seen the reverse happen as well. I have seen teams who use test-driven development, and they have a higher ranking, because they have those unique skills. And they keep other teams keep hearing like, why can't you just be more than that as that team? Why can't you do that? But at the same time, the company is not giving the means to close that skill gap between the teams. And so you have to make sure that there's money or a workshop and things like that to do it. And another thing is that if you redefine your system, if you create different microservices, if you create bounded contexts, it will change your team, because you're organizing your teams around that, and people start to resist because they really don't want to change teams. For whatever reason, maybe they went into a company who just every 4 months they were, oh, she has found a different way. This is my cat. I could have made my joke. I had a wonderful joke. I was like, I'm going to give a talk, and I can make you one promise. By the time the talk has ended, you will have seen my cat, because I thought I fixed the problem by removing the chair next to me. I didn't make the joke, but she has found a solution for that. All right.
She knew what she was doing.
Yes. Okay, bounded context. Yes, if you change your bounded context and your microservices and your software architecture, your teams will have to change with it. And people might not want that. So when you're doing collaborative modeling, and when you're redesigning your system, you have to ask, how far can I go? I always ask this as a consultant when I'm sort of dumped in a group of people who look suspiciously at me sometimes. because they had the same ideas. And when I say them, they sort of get accepted. And when they said them, they didn't. And that causes conflict between me and the people I have to work with. So I always try to get clear communication lines. And I always say, like, how far can I go? Can I introduce new technologies? And if I do, what are the consequences? And I can educate you on certain things here, but I can't do it on all of them. Is there a budget available to actually educate your software developers? Yeah? If I change, can I change the teams, or do I design a system that keeps the current teams in mind? I can do that. I can make different decisions, go for different bounded contexts, make them a bit larger or make them a bit smaller, because that is one of the constraints that I have. Okay? And it's a socio-technical system. The social will impact your eventual, it's a constraint on your architecture as well. And if I can't change the teams, or if there is no good support to introduce certain things, then I just don't do it. And it doesn't mean that I give people a less well-designed software system. It's just that it was done in a different context. And people don't always understand that. It's like most of the software developers, there's the solution, but there are many solutions. And depending on what you find important, you will pick one solution over another. And that's just what it is. Because I don't want resistance when I go into companies and redesign their systems. I don't want to get conflict. I don't want to get that resistance against my design. I want them to be happy and on board to actually implement it. And then this is another one. And I don't have a real solution yet. Like, I haven't found a way to frame it yet that sort of prevents this. But in domain-driven design, we speak about core, supporting, and generic subdomains. And we strategize with them. We say that inside a software system, not everything has the same value. There are certain things that are just absolutely necessary for this company to run, and we call that core. And then there are things that are, still important, and we call that supporting. And then they're the things that, we have to do to make that entire thing actually work, and we call those generic. And when we do this exercise of trying to find out where exactly the business value is and how it compares to one another, I always see sort of higher management or team leads then saying, oh, but if this is generic, then, well, we shouldn't put that much people on it. Well, just because something is generic does not mean it is unimportant, because you get in a very weird cycle, where they don't have the people, so they do hacks to get anything into production anyways, which causes a lot of bugs because they're continuously hacking, which does not make them feel great, which makes them want to leave the team, makes them want to leave the company. And then they say, oh yeah, well, it's just generic, we're not going to hire anyone to replace them. And then you just get even more into that cycle and kind of spins out of control. And I always say that it's not because it's generic that it means it's unimportant. We needed to have this entire system actually functioning, but somehow people still hear, generic is unimportant. And I haven't found a good way yet to sort of prevent the social consequences of this exercise, even though this exercise is very important, because we want to have a good software strategy and we want to make sure that that aligns with our business. But it causes conflict between teams. And I don't really know how to do that, or how to prevent that initial trigger. If it's, generic, then it's unimportant. I'm not saying all companies think like that, but I have met quite a few that sort of had that reasoning. And so if you can think of anything, I would love to hear about it, or how you deal with it in your company if you had this problem. I'm always looking for better ways to explain this and why we do this strategic classification in a way that does not trigger the social conflict of it. And Eve has raised their hand, but I will have to.
Let me see if I can unmute. I don't know if it's gonna. I've got a question. Have you done that? Oh no. Maybe there's a mistake.
Yeah, it should work now. Yeah, so well, I work for Telenet, right? And I'm actually part of a team that is implementing a new SIME solution, right? Which is, well, we had a custom build. We now moved to a commercial off the shelf with some custom development around it. And I always say, like, this is for us also a generic domain, right? But do note, if we're down, then the whole company is down. So that's how I try to make it explicit that generic indeed does not mean, well, it's like less of importance. And it helps, to be honest.
Yeah, that's a good one. Like, if see that if this goes down, then how much of the damn system is actually working?
Indeed.
That's
all right.
Thanks.
You're welcome.
All right. So I talked about all these social things that just can drastically go wrong when you put people in the same room. So the question sort of gets, who are we going to call to deal with all of this? And the answer is a facilitator. Yay! Facilitators sort of have this, I don't know, bad reputation, but they actually do very, very important work. Facilitation comes from the French to faciliter, and it means to render easy. And so the job of a facilitator is actually to make things easier for other people. In the context of collaborative modeling, this actually means that they make, the process, doing the collaborative modeling, and making sure that all, stakeholders get along. So managing those social challenges. So that's sort of the two things that a facilitator does in collaborative modeling. And it's not easy to do that. But I will talk a bit about what the skills are that you will need. But first, before you say, damn, do we have to hire for someone here if I start doing collaborative modeling, or we're doing collaborative modeling, but we don't have a facilitator, and I also don't want any of those social challenges, or we want to do that better. And then the good news is, no, you don't have to hire anyone necessarily, because a facilitator is a role and not a job title. It's something that you can learn. Yay! So that's lovely news. I'm a consultant. I get dumped into groups. And my main job is to give advice on how to design their software systems better, right? Theo explained what Adling does, and that's my main job. But at the same time, sometimes I have to facilitate. I have to make sure that people understand this process, and that these, stakeholders don't get angry with one another, and don't blame each other. If the CTO says, "Hey, Hien, so happy you're here, I'm actually going to join you," well, then I kindly have to explain that, yes, you can join me, but you are the CTO, and I want to understand the problems with the software system and how it makes people feel right now. And when you put a CTO in that room, they might not feel comfortable anymore doing that because you have a very high rank. So at certain points in time, I might just kick you out of the session if I think you're bothering. And I can do that because I am a consultant and I do have a bit more, I have a higher ranking. An implicit higher ranking, so I can do that easier. And if you're a facilitator and you're internal, then that is not an easy thing to do. but it is one, a part of your responsibility. And, we have a lot of tricks up our sleeve on how to do all of that. And the first thing that you need is a set of skills. So you need certain skills which you can learn, and that's the good news. And so the first thing is being an observer. When I became a teacher, the first thing that we had to do was go to a school and go sit at the end of the classroom, and we had to observe the group dynamic, how the teacher was actually acting in front of the class. We had to make this chart and point out where everyone was sitting and what exactly was happening and what type of. So we just had to observe and write a ridiculous long report about it, which was not fun because I was 18 years old and that just seemed boring. But now I'm very happy that I actually had to do that, because as a facilitator, you need to observe what's happening, how are people reacting, is someone tapping out of this, or do they keep staring at their watch? Is there certain expressions on their face when a certain topic gets up, so that I can ask a question about that. If I sort of see, if I'm remote and I see people, if a topic comes up and people randomly just turn off their camera, I have to notice that. And I notice that by becoming good at observing. And the way I always see it is a way that Weinberg sort of expressed it in Design System Heuristics, which is a very good book to read, by the way. It's unfinished, well, because he died. So there's no conclusion, no wrap up with the bow. Unfortunately, he passed away before he could finish the book. But there's some really good advice in there, and it's not just about designing a system. It's also about the people when you have to do that. And one of the things he said is that when words and music don't go together, look for the missing element. So if I say I'm fine, we all know I'm not fine. We can hear it in my voice that I'm not fine, even though my words contradict that, right? So my behavior and how I talk contradict. If people keep turning off their cameras on a topic, then they don't want you to see something in their facial expression. So the words and the music don't go together. Well, actually, there's no music anymore, they're just words. And that means something, and we have to pay attention to that. The second thing we need to have is compassion. I know there's a lot of talk about empathy, and I agree. Empathy is a skill, it's a muscle, and you can develop it. Cognitive empathy is something that you can do, and there are plenty of exercises to sort of expand your cognitive empathy. But I don't like talking about it, because feeling empathic for someone doesn't mean you do anything with that. I can feel very sad and understand my coworker completely, but that does not necessarily trigger action. And so that's why I talk about compassion, because for me, that is empathy plus action. If I notice that, someone is very frustrated, I want to hold space in that collaborative modeling session so that they can express them. I want to create a safe environment so that they feel okay to express them. So if the CTO keeps interrupting, this person, I am kindly going to say something about it. I'm going to be very, I have empathy with the person that keeps being interrupted, and I will talk about it. I will not just stay silent and do nothing with that. And the last one is neutrality. So we have observation skills, we have compassion, and then you have neutrality. Because nobody is neutral. And then you're like, well, you just said we all need to have neutrality. We're human too. I, as a facilitator, am very much human too. And I do get angry and frustrated when things are not going well. I have opinions, I have thoughts, I have interests. I'm all of that. But we have to learn to not act on them. We have to learn to stay neutral. We have to understand when we're giving meaning to something, when we're just supposed to be observing. Like if if someone is checking their phone and is not paying attention, you can tell them, it seems that you're a bit distracted here. What we don't want to do is add judgment to that. We don't want to say, well, this is actually a very important session and you just keep sitting on your phone. As a facilitator, you're not helping that situation at all, right? So you have to stay neutral. You have to refrain from adding judgment to your observations when you're addressing them in the group. And you will address them in the group because you have compassion. So you will have action to make sure that everything is okay. And so that's one of the skills you need as well. And I've talked about everything that can go wrong and how to deal with it. And you might say, well, maybe collaborative modeling is just not worth it. Okay? If we have to do all of that, we have to learn something new, or we have to teach other people, and then we have to deal with all this human stuff as well. And this is not what I'm trying to say. This is definitely not what I'm trying to say. Collaborative modeling works. Okay? You get a better designed software system because you try to because you try to follow those principles and you use the tools to do that, right? You try to understand, you create the language, you create those boundaries, you design your architecture around it, and you will come up with something that's better aligned with the business and all that kind of thing. But we do collaborative modeling because we want to accomplish something. And what we want to accomplish is making good design decisions. I like to talk about having sustainable design decisions. Okay? That's where we want to end up. And because we want to end up there, we do collaborative modeling. And because we do collaborative modeling, we do have to deal with the social aspect of all of it. And we can't just blatantly ignore it. And when I say sustainability, I don't mean in the ecological sense, although that, might be one of those constraints that you have when you're designing your software system, that it has to be as ecological as possible. That's not what I'm talking about. With sustainability, I mean consistency and clarity on your design decisions. The way we want to make design decisions in collaborative modeling, we want to make sure that it is going to work out in the future, that we can keep doing it in the same way. We want consistency in the way that we make decisions, and we want to make sure that everyone understands and is on board with how those decisions were made. Okay? And so consistency is that we make them in a similar way. And how can we do that? I want to sort of go into decision-making theory now for a bit. We want to create consistency. And I want to do that because I feel that how we view decisions, we see them as this point in time, which is not beneficial in any way. And decision-making theory actually redefines a decision. It says that it's a choice between two or more alternatives that involves an irrevocable allocation of resources. And you sort of say, well, I don't see how that redefines a decision, and I get it, because it's a very horrible, it's not even easy to pronounce any of this. So I'm going to go over a few of the points. It says we need alternatives. And an alternative is basically we need something that leads to a different future. And I have seen this happen. People are talking about system design, and they're sort of going over the tiny details that will not lead to a different future. And we need that. We need alternatives. We need to weigh the best options. We need to compare options with Alcar. We need to make a choice. As I said, the solution is very much what we think of as software developers. And that's not really right, because if we want to make a decision, we need multiple designs, because if we don't have alternatives, there's no decision to make. And an alternative has to lead to a different future. It's not about the tiny details. It's about a very real and different design that we're going to push into production, or that we're going to choose. Yeah? And then it also says irrevocable allocation of resources. And that basically just means that there's a cost in being wrong. Yeah? A resource is, time, money, energy spent. And we dedicate our time or money or energy to one of the alternatives. We start implementing it. We spend time, money, and energy on that. Yeah? And at some point, there's a cost in being wrong. And so a decision isn't this fixed point in time anymore because of it. It's just that the more time you actually dedicate to an alternative, the higher the cost is in being wrong. Yeah? And reevaluating whether or not this actually works, it's just not going to be that easy. Yeah? And so I like that definition of a decision much better than that single point in time because of it. Because it's a process. It's not a fixed point, it becomes a process. And I can change my mind. I can do something, I can put a design in production, and I can say, well, this is not working out. Because as long as I have not tested anything, I can be wrong about what I think will be a good design for the system. Yeah? And I can change my mind, but changing my mind, or changing, the mind of a group, it's going to cost something. And we just have to see if it's worth the cost. And sometimes it isn't, and sometimes it is. Yeah? And so if you want to make a good decision, you need to have certain elements present there. Okay? So I already spoke about the alternatives, things that we can do. We need alternatives to be there. We also need people taking charge of a decision, right? There's a decision maker, it's not on this chart. We need information, right? We need to understand what exactly it is that we're trying to decide. Okay? So that's what we know. And we need to know the preferences. Okay? As I said, everyone has a different experience, have a different culture background. And because of that, people will have a different preference over the alternatives. Yeah? As I said, if you value, an ecological, a sustainable software system, you will have a preference that actually highlights that, over a design that doesn't change the team, because there are people who don't want to change the team. You'll have a preference, and you will advocate for that preference. And so we have to make that explicit, which we want and why. And sometimes, often, we don't even fully understand why we hate something that bad, or why we love something that much. If you ask me to discuss, 2 or 4 tabs, 2 or 4 spaces, I can give you that. But to truly understand why I hate 2 spaces so much in my code, I could not really tell you. And sometimes I have a preference and I don't really fully understand it. But if I know that, well, my preference is that, I can take a step back and I can better think about all the other options. I can say, well, this is my preference, and now I look at the other things. So that's for a decision maker and all that. We also need logic, a process, and then we have some process that we apply, and then we will have a course of action that comes out of it, a plan. We have a plan, and eventually there will be an outcome to our decision. All right, can't use that anymore. Need to use the button. Yeah. Okay. So a decision maker. Okay? People don't like that I say this, that there's a decision maker. They say we have group decisions, and I was right, and it's like risks, but there's always someone with a veto in there. There is. And, if you're in a leadership role, you are often the person that has that veto power. And I don't mean use it all the time, but you do need to understand that, there is someone in there that just has a bit of a higher ranking because of us, and they can veto certain things. Yeah? And to figure out who the decision maker is, you need to look at who has the authority, the explicit ranking, but also who has the commitment to make a decision. And that part is very important. Because I have seen people with explicit ranking who had that veto power, but just did not have the commitment to see it through. I'll give you an example from my personal life. A friend of mine was having problems at work, and she sort of started talking about it. And I was like, hey, I'm a software developer, I solve problems. And so I started giving her all these alternatives, started saying my preference on it, how she could implement it. And she got very angry with me. And see, the thing was, I was very committed to solving her problem. I just did not have that authority. And I have seen both things. I have seen team leads who just did not have the commitment. They were scared that if this all goes south, I will be the one to blame. And so they didn't want to make a decision. And you can notice that because the decision just keeps popping up again at random. It's like, I thought we had decided, yeah, but I want to discuss it again. But I thought we had decided. And so they don't have the commitment to do it. So a decision maker is someone who has both. We have a frame, which was not in my model of what a decision is with the elements. But that's sort of how we view a decision, sort of the boundary that we create around a decision. So if you want to move, you can say, I want to, move to a new apartment with lesser space, so I have to pay less rent. And then we'll start searching for alternatives where you have to pay rent. But you can also say, I want to buy an apartment. And then we're going to start looking at alternatives where you actually, have to buy the apartment. And so in both is that we want to move. Okay, so at first it's sort of, but we create a frame around it. And we have to do that when we're making any decision, because if we don't, then it sort of just spindles out of control. If we said we have this very difficult part of the system and it's not working and we want to redesign it, and we don't really frame it very well as what is the design decision that needs to be made here, you sort of end up with a complete redesign of the system. And well, people don't like it because that was not the intent. And so you need to frame the context in which you are making a decision. You need to create a boundary around it, and you need to make very explicit on what exactly are we deciding here. We're just going to tackle this small part of the system. We want to do this better. I know the other parts have issues too. We can tackle that later, but that's a completely different decision, and it's just off topic. And one thing that a facilitator then sort of has to do is keep reminding people of this frame. Stopping people when you get out of frame and you're sort of going into that rabbit hole of redesigning an entire decision. You have that with refactoring as well, right? You go into this rabbit hole if you have any software development experience. And you sort of go into this rabbit hole of refactoring. And because you didn't really frame what you wanted to refactor very well. And so you have the alternatives, which I already talked about as something that leads to a different future. And the thing is that people always say we didn't have a choice. And then I say, well, no, there's always more than one option. No matter what you do, there's always more than one option. Mostly because doing nothing is also an option, which people don't really see as a valid option. But sometimes it helps by just putting it there. Keeping the software system as is a valid option when you're thinking about redesigning your software system. And we just don't do it. And I just put it out there because it is an option, and I want to make that explicit. And then they can already see, you know, oh, we're going to make a choice here. And that makes everything go a bit better. Anyways, and the reason it has to lead to a different future is because, right, if you don't have a different future, you don't really have to choose, and then you just don't have a decision. And also, you know, your preference. If you don't care what different future you're getting, well, then you don't have to make a decision. I might as well just, you know, take a dart and throw it at the options and see where it hits, because I just don't care what it is. And if I don't care, I don't need to make a decision. And that is why preferences are important. It's also when people say, you know, I just don't care, that probably one of the examples where words and music don't really fit together, because they do care about which software system they're going to have to design in the future. And value-based heuristics here are very helpful to sort of understand preferences. And I keep going with the ecological, but you know, if you had a very bad experience with microservices, then you might value starting out with the monolith more. Okay? And so trying to find these preferences and looking at how you function and what your experience has been, and putting it all down will help you make, you know, understand more better why you like things that much, or why you hate monoliths. I never worked in a good monolith, but I'm sure they're out there. Yeah? And so what we need is information. How much information is always how much do we do collaborative modeling? In general, in a decision, you just, you know, if you generalize that, is how much information do we actually need? And again, if certain information, you know, doesn't change, you know, any of your thoughts on the decision that needs to be made, then it's worthless. Yeah? And so at some point, you will do collaborative modeling and you will notice that I'm not learning anything new here. I'm not seeing any new possible designs because of this. I'm not having any new alternatives to put up. So I'm going to stop, yeah? Because it's just not changing anything. And as I mentioned, in collaborative modeling, that information you get by understanding the business processes and the rules and user stories and workflows and all that kind of thing. And then you have the logic. So when we're designing the system itself, we often use heuristics there. But we can also sort of do an analysis. Sorry, it's I'll get some more water that my tongue collaborates again. So when we're actually creating the alternatives, we use heuristics because we're making very small design decisions every time, but we're just, you know, creating the alternatives, so that's fine. But then once we have alternatives, you know, like this, I have two alternatives. In one, the sort of the back office is separated. In the other one, the payment system is separated. Both are options, and we sort of want to see, okay, which one now fits everything better. Yeah? And so what I like to use for that is the pro-con fix list. Yeah? It's a very simple visualization, yeah? But I want to do collaborative modeling, which is just a visualization technique. So I collaboratively want to find the consequences of picking one over another, and it's very simple. The reason I like this so much, it's because we all know the pro-con list. We made them probably at least in our heads at some point in our lives. But this adds a fix. It also adds the neutral, but I'll talk about that in a sec. But I like the fix. Yeah? So for example, say that I have to choose, I want to start biking to work. Yeah, I'm going to give up my company car and start biking to work. one of the options is I don't give up my company car. And the other one is I start biking to work. But if it rains, I get wet. And I don't know about any of you, but I hate getting wet or arriving wet or sitting wet in an office all day. But I can do things to prevent that. I can put clean clothes at the office for rainy days. And then I can put them on and I'm not wet all day. I can buy a protective gear against the rain and pull that over my clothes when it rains. So I can fix the fact that I get wet when it rains. It still rains and it's still not a pleasant thing. It's not something positive all of a sudden. I'm not excited when it's raining. But the negativity just does not have that much of an impact anymore than it had when I had none of those fixes. And so that's what the fix is. It tries to neutralize the negative impact as much as possible. And the neutral column I added a while back. I didn't use it at the beginning, but I started noticing that in some contexts, people did not really see it as a positive or a negative thing. It was not something that, had a huge impact. And so I felt it beneficial to sort of have a neutral column, say like, this is something that will happen. Like if we, introduce event sourcing, we will have to learn that, but our company is actually very supportive about it. We get the budget, we get the training, we get all of it. There's an enabling team if you have a team topologies. So that's going to be fine. And it's not positive that you have to invest into learning a new skill. But it's also not a negative anymore because you're not creating any of those skill gaps. So it's just, we will have to do this and we should put it out there. But we, on its own, not really. Okay? And so we often talk about we have to find the trade-offs between different designs. Okay? And so if you fill in one of these lists for all your alternatives, what you're getting is everything in this list from alternative 1 and nothing in the list from alternative 2. And that is your trade-off. Okay? We're getting all of this, all the negative, all the good stuff, all the fixes we'll have to make, and we're getting none of that. Okay? And very often with design, things will be, you'll have things in the pro and con that are actually in both, that you get either way, and so you can ignore it. Okay? And so this is also a very easy way to actually truly understand the trade-off. It is context dependent because companies function different and you're in a different social setting when you switch teams or when you switch companies. So what is something negative might be neutral in another company, might be something positive in another country. And so it's not something that stays true forever, but it is at that point in time how we see the situation. And as I said, when you've done all of that, you did this, we now have a course of action, right? We know which design and we need to start implementing it, and we'll create a plan on how to actually get there. And at the end, we have an outcome. And a decision is not the same as an outcome, right? The decision is that entire process. And the outcome is the end result of doing your course of action. But you can't just blindly follow the course of action. You have to evaluate because your contexts keep changing. Redesigning your software system, it's not something you do in 3 months. It's not something you do in a year. We are talking about years here, right? I've never seen, most of the designs I've created never got implemented. And that is because they started, but then a year from now, things changed. Okay? And I can't just blindly follow it because it takes too much time to actually completely overhaul your software design. Okay? And you can't follow it blindly. And one of the reasons why you can't follow it blindly or why is also because of the uncertainty when you're making a decision. It's not something we often talk about. We talk about the unknown unknowns, and the known unknowns. And when we know we don't know something, we can find it, and then it's information and we're fine. But there are always unknown unknowns. Okay? And because of that, we always make design decisions under uncertainty. And designing is basically betting, placing a bet on the future. I think this will have a benefit with all the knowledge that I have at this point in time, with all the alternatives I considered. I really think this is the best way forward. And some new information can come to light, and you might want to reevaluate all of that. So you're making them under uncertainty. And I'm very happy about this word. It's called resulting. It's coming from the poker world. And so when a decision is made, we sort of have this post-mortem sometimes, which sounds very negative. But I also think when you made a good, when everything went really well, you should also do one to see why. And very often you see resulting there. And that is, you confuse the quality of your decision with the quality of your outcome. As I said, I have not worked in a good monolith yet. And so we say monoliths are bad because the outcome was bad. But I don't know. Maybe if I could gaze into the past and see what was happening, picking that monolith was actually a very good decision. It was the best alternative that they had. It's just that because of that uncertainty, and because they blindly followed the course of action, that we did not end up with a good monolith. We ended up with a big ball of mud. It was all confusing. And so we have to ask ourselves when we make design decisions, is this not working because we made a bad decision? Was the quality, did we, like, was there a missing element? Did we not find enough information? Did we not find enough alternatives? Did we not analyze the problem well enough? Did we not do enough collaborative modeling? So was that bad? Or is it just that, we forgot to implement feedback loops and we just blindly went ahead with it? Because the thing is, we had that starter process modeling at the beginning, which Big Screen just blindly follows, and there are gray arrows in the background. And it turns out that those gray arrows are actually very, very, very important. We need those feedback loops because we don't know what we don't know. And at some point we might discover that, and we need to make sure that we sort of verify very quickly, or we still heading in the right direction here with this design. If the company decides, well, we actually don't want to invest all that much anymore in this product line, and the teams are heavily investing in redesigning that product line, well, then you don't have to continue to redesign that product line because business doesn't want to invest in it anymore. And so we have to make sure, and we'll make a different decision. We'll pick that alternative which nobody wants, and we'll just keep the current design. We'll freeze it here and we'll stop, and we'll do something else where it's more valued. So we need feedback loops there. And so that's, consistency. If I do this process of designing and redesigning, and I do it well, and I do this collaborative modeling well, and I make sure all the elements are there, we'll start making decisions in a similar way. And we'll see if the way we make decisions, the quality of our decisions, if they're good. It doesn't mean you'll get a good outcome necessarily, but that's consistency. We'll make design decisions in a consistent way. The other one that we want is clarity. Because, again, social technical system redesign have real social technical impact, and we need to know that. So we want clarity of thought, and we want clarity on how decisions are being made. And that's something that I very much find absent in most companies. I don't want to say 100%, because I am saying this with uncertainty. I have not worked in all companies, but most of the time, who can decide what? And And, how exactly was this decided is just not something that people know. It's gone, that knowledge. And so who can decide what? We always talk about creating autonomous teams or making them as autonomous as possible. But we need to say then, okay, what decisions can these teams actually make? Where does this all end? Can they freely introduce new technologies? Can they freely introduce new programming languages? Can they freely just redesign their part of the system? Like, what can they do? And what decisions can the business make? Because I often see business dictating something to IT teams that you're just like, I don't think you have the right knowledge and information to make this decision. Like, you're telling us to create these microservices, or you're telling us to use this product, which we have to integrate into our system, and you're not consulting us at all. And that's, turns out it's actually not that easy to integrate. And then we look bad because you think we can't do our jobs, but you actually made a decision that wasn't yours to make. And, what are the things that an architect can decide? And things like that. We have to make sure who can decide what. And we also have to define how we're going to decide. Most of the time, if you live in Western society, you were raised in a democratic land and it has multiple implementation. But that also sort of gives us this feeling of everyone has to be on board and we have to make democratic decisions, even in a company. And so we default to that, to group decisions. Everyone has to be able to share their opinion and everyone needs to get the say, and we need to make compromises so that everyone feels good about it, which often does not lead to the best redesign of systems. It doesn't. If you start compromising not on the constraints, like I can't change the teams and I have this much budget, or this piece is very important. But if you just start to compromise on because, well, they have that preference and they have that preference, you don't end up with the best design. And the thing is, you can make autocratic decisions. You can. And here is a model of some levels of how much buy-in people actually get when making a decision. And so if you go full democratic, then you have an ID. It's an open question. As a leader, you should just sort of throw it in the group. And you say, well, I'm the decision maker, I have the veto right, but honestly, I'm not going to use it. It's up to you. And so you have to generate all the alternatives and you have to pick one and you have to implement it. Everything is on you. And that's, the most free, most buy-in. And the other end is a command. I, as the decision maker, I have made my decision. I made the analysis, I weighed the options, and this is what we're going to do. And there's no discussing it. And people don't feel comfortable doing that. I want to go back to my example of the formatter under default settings. And one of the reasons that this went so horribly wrong is because that team lead could not give commands. That person had already decided, we're going to do the formatter under default settings, and I don't want to discuss this. But they presented it as an ID. And so higher management, again, there was one of those fractal patterns. You weren't supposed to do commands. And so even when they wanted to give commands, they actually did it as an ID. And then people started to resist because they felt unheard, because the decision was already made. So make a command is perfectly acceptable, and make sure that you frame it when it is one. And then you have some in-betweens, right? You have suggestion, which, intentions are clear. Hey, I made the frame. This is what we're going to do. Not discussable anymore. I have some sort of alternatives. I want your opinions on it. Any insights are welcome. If you have another idea, please pitch it. But don't ignore the ones I already did. So you have a suggestion, and then you have a proposal. which goes a step further, which you said, you know, I have a frame, I have my alternatives. I know which one I'm going to pick. I just want you to look if, you know, there was important information that I just missed out on. Okay? And so only when there are serious objections, because it's not going to work, I already know which alternative we're going to pick. Okay? And so you can sort of play with that, with any of it, and decide, you know, who can do what and when and how are we actually going to decide this. And, you know, because you know how the company makes decisions and everybody knows their responsibility and their boundaries in all of that, and you have consistency, you'll find yourself making decisions in a very similar way. So the consistency and the clarity is in place. And so in the long run, the quality of your decision will go up because of that. And so it's not something that you'll get right tomorrow if you start collaborative modeling. It might not even be something that you get right in half a year from now. But the more you do it, you know, the more you think about collaborative modeling, the more you find alternatives for your design decisions, the better those decisions will actually become. Yeah? And of course, don't forget that a facilitator also helps with the clarity and the consistency, right? They try to render it easy. So they try to figure out, can we make this decision? Who is supposed to make this decision? How is this decision going to be made, right? And anyway, that's when your decisions sort of can become sustainable. Your design decisions become sustainable through collaborative modeling. And that's sort of the conclusion of my talk, that if you think about all of this, really think about the social impact, make sure there's a person in place, make sure there's a process in place to make these design decisions, that we can do a lot better at the end of it. Thank you very much. And as I said, there's also a book. It has a discount right now. So if you want to know more about cognitive biases, or if you want to read some more examples on all of this with design and collaborative modeling in mind, that's a place to go to.
Amazing. Thanks, Gien. So yeah, let's take some questions. I know there's one here already, but we could also just unmute as well. And yeah, obviously we will record, this has been recorded, so we'll have the video up. Just find us on LinkedIn or Twitter or wherever you do these things, and you can find the video there. So if you have a question, you can raise your hand. I see one here. It's more of a comment, I guess. It says, I think you could increase the buy-in even on commands by explaining the why behind the decision. I think that was on your last one. I don't know if you see that.
Wait, let me yeah, you can. You can increase the buy-in by explaining the why. Definitely. I'm not saying a command doesn't mean do it. You also sort of, you know, the whole getting clarity means that people understand why this is what you're going to do. I forgot to mention that too in the talk. So when I mentioned that under those default settings, that team lead had been in a lot of situations where there was endless discussions, you know, as I said, 2 spaces, 4 spaces, empty lines, and where to put the brackets, and they had to, you know, in their previous jobs, waste so much time on things that are just not that important if we're all being honest about it, even though we start wars over it. That's why they wanted to do default settings. And if they had just said that, we're going to use default settings, we're going to do it for 6 months, because you need a long time to get used to it. Like after a month, And after 6 months, we'll see how it's going. And if people still, you know, like despise it, I might, you know, feedback loop. I might make a different decision and not give a command. I would have totally be on board with that. I could understand, you know, not wanting those endless discussions. I really could. So the why you do something or you make a command is indeed always very important. You can now ask questions with the mic as well. You normally
We've got, yeah. Yeah, if you raise your thing, you can do it. Otherwise, I'll speak them out. We've got two here.
okay.
So Alexander says, in regard to the resistance, what would be procedures to find what is actually causing it for being able to overcome them?
Procedures to find, well, that I'm a consultant, so I have to say it at least once. That depends. No. Right, I had the resistance line. I said like you start with jokes and you start with sarcastic jokes, and then sort of you start resisting more and more, and the end of it is a what we call war or withdrawal, right? Like there's, you know, the departments aren't talking to each other anymore, or they quit and things that, so the very bad way of resistance. And it's sort of, where are you in that line? How, you know, how long has this been going on? Because if you're more to, well, you know, people are slowing down, and you know they're not trying anymore, then I will need a completely different approach than when they're still very much at well, they kind of make these stingy jokes about it, but they're still making the stingy jokes about it. Because then I can do it in a group setting. I can say, look, I noticed you're joking a lot about this topic. I can do what we call a climate report. I throw it in the group what I am observing, without judgment. And so I look at it, it's like, well, you're making a lot of jokes about this new payment system. Or you're making a lot of jokes about the core domain team. And I just throw it in the group and I don't say anything and I see what happens. People hate silence, so when you bring silence, they will start talking. The negative thing is that you also have to sit in silence, and that's also very awkward for you as a facilitator. But you just throw your observations, see what happens. So depending on the stage, I can still do it in group. If it's really, really bad, I will go more for a one-on-one. I will dig deeper. I'll try not have the group sort of resolve it all by themselves anymore. And you know, sometimes it's gotten, you know, too bad that, you know, either, you know, one or a few, like, you have to, you know, they have to withdraw. Somehow you have to, if they're in war, then you have to go to withdrawal. And sometimes that means firing someone. Personally, sometimes that means to quit, because I felt that there was no way I was going to get rid of all these frustrations anymore. And then you just have to point it out to them. It's like, you're so frustrated, we cannot resolve this anymore for you. Maybe it's better to think about changing job, not forcing them, but, you know, offering something which they probably already know. So it's not a straightforward answer. But a climate report is one of those things that you can try out, and having more personal conversations when you notice it's bad is also something you could try.
Thanks. Okay, we also have another question. I can see you on screen. I don't know if you want to ask it, otherwise I can ask it.
Do you have any suggestions? I did not ask that question. Why am I the one responding? Do you? No. Any suggestions on how to best communicate and clarify who can decide what? How detailed should this be? Do you have examples? Communicating decisions, we do have a few tools for those. anything within anything within your microservice is okay. I think like having some sort of place, it could be something as weird as a markdown repository, right? When you have open source projects, there are guidelines, and if you just add it somewhere where it's accessible for anyone in the company, then that's good. How detailed, that's a bit more difficult. As I said, I have not seen any company that actually did any of this, so I'm still trying to figure out myself, because I think that's important, and it's part of my responsibility as a consultant to figure it all out, and then make it down. So I haven't seen good examples yet. Mostly what I do is there's always a place that they put these type of things, and then make sure it's there and it's accessible and it's thoroughly communicated. For design decisions, I most of the time go for an architectural design record, which is a very good one. But then you capture specific decisions, and you make sure that in a year from now, it's still clear why you decided something and how you decided it. I see a hand raised, Mike.
Yeah, thanks for sharing the knowledge for starters. You mentioned ADRs just a second ago. That's something that's been bubbling in my head when I saw your presentation, and I was wondering if you thought about expanding ADRs with some of those elements that you mentioned, or maybe you're already doing that, and if so, do you use some specific template that maybe is shared with the community and under the rock or something?
So one of the things, we have an example in the book, and one of the things that I do is that the pro configs, I use that visualization. I'm very fond of it, and I add that to it as well, which often you don't get that. You don't get any sort of analysis. And so when I'm making the analysis, I just add every context. Sometimes I'll even add the alternatives that were available, but that depends on the situation. If I want to keep understanding the trade-off and not just this is what we decided in the end, I do need to add all those alternatives and the analysis of all those alternatives, or I can write up some quick sentences that capture each alternative and stating why we thought the other one was just not that great. You can change them any way you like. It's not fixed in stone. You can change them any way you like. I put the decision maker on there. I also put all the people that were there when making the decision. So that's information I add. That's an element of those things. The context is already there, which is basically the frame a bit in which you're making that decision. So there's already a few of those things on it anyways, they just are named differently.
Yeah, I was mostly thinking about those soft stuff like people preferences and this kind of stuff, like social soft things that, oh, someone was passionate by this, or someone had bad experience with this kind of thing. But yeah, thanks.
Yeah. So the preferences are marked on, so I add the preference, I make the preferences visual on that pro configs list. And so when I copy it over, I also know these are the people who were there and there were their preferences, because it's in that list. I make that explicit. So that's why it's in it. I just didn't realize you were talking about that. It sort of automatically pops up by the way I do it. Yeah.
Okay. Cool. Thank you.
All right.
Great. Yeah, so I just popped in some final links to our website where you can learn more about what we do and the conferences as well if you have a session or anything like that. And yeah, people can reach out to you directly, I guess, Gien, on LinkedIn or.
Yeah.
Yeah. Cool. Well, yeah, thanks so much. We'll be doing one of these again, I guess, in the coming months. We haven't got anything lined up just yet, but we definitely will. So